and welcome back to the Bill Brief, the podcast where we break down legislation, what it says, why it matters, and how it could shape our communities. I'm your host, DJ William, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at H.R. 9250, also known as the Great American Outdoors Act 250. Alrighty, so this is actually a great piece of legislation, and it's a bipartisan bill that has hundreds of co-sponsors. I know normally I'm like, this bill was co-sponsored by, or sponsored by, right? But this bill has hundreds of co-sponsors. I couldn't list all of them. It's incredible how much support this bill has gotten, and also some critics that have criticized this legislation, which we're going to talk about a little later. But this is such a cool piece of legislation that I'm so excited to talk about today. So let's get right into it. So it actually addresses a really important question, and we're going to talk about, all the questions that it addresses. There are various ones in all the pieces of legislation that we talk about today. There are specifically two. There might be a third one. I always love coming up with these, but let's get into the first main one. So our question is, what if fixing America's national parks could cost billions of dollars, but Congress also wants foreign visitors to pay at least $100 to get in? So immediately just hearing the word foreign, you're probably like, oh no, I can see how this could be controversial, and we're going to get into all of those little details. But that's one of the main questions that this bill asks. And that's the idea behind this bill as a whole. What it would do is it's basically saying that, hey, we're going to put billions, literally billions of dollars towards fixing aging roads, trails, buildings, bridges, and any other important infrastructure across America's public lands. But it also raises another major question. Okay, so everything that I mentioned was really good, and you're probably like, yes, we do need a lot of money to go towards fixing these roads, fixing these buildings. But the question that this bill raises is, who should pay for maintaining America's public lands? Should it be taxpayers? Should it be the visitors? Or should it be both? So this is super duper exciting. But yeah, so let's get right into the provisions of this bill. So there are a lot, actually. So we're going to focus on specifics. And it's super interesting because when you go to congress.gov for this bill, most bills just have a little short summary. Just a little paragraph of what the bill's about and kind of what it entails. This one had the whole bill written down. So like a giant, you could keep scrolling. It was so cool. And I was like, okay, this is an important bill that we should talk about today for sure, 100%. Alrighty, so the main first provision of this legislation is that it creates the America's Legacy Restoration Fund. So what does that mean, right? It basically renames existing national parks, the existing public land legacy restoration fund, and it would be used to both repair and also I love the word modernize, because you're like, what does it mean to modernize something, right? It means to just make it fit in. Because there are some buildings that look, like they're crumbling, like they're really, really old. And of course, there are some that should be kept that way, and that's what makes them amazing. But in our, public parks, probably not, right? Things that people look at, maybe they walk up specific stairs towards buildings and they're unsafe. It's not just about them being old, it's about them being unsafe. They would modernize these public land infrastructure. It covers the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Indian Education. And we're going to talk about how the money is going to be split across all of these as well, because there is a split. Certain percentages that go to one, it's going to be 25% to the National Park Service, this much percent. Yeah, it's going to be getting all into the specifics. So that's why this bill is super important, because when you hear this bill, you might think, okay, national parks, that's what this bill is about. But, this provision clearly proves that it's more than just about national parks, which is super duper cool. Sorry. So it's about, forests, it's about wildlife refuges, and also the Bureau of Indian Education schools. So super duper cool. Okay, now we're going to get into our second main provision. And this is something that's really funny because most bills, most pieces of legislation always address this question. And by hearing this, you can just know that I'm going to talk about it in the counter arguments later. But the question is, where does the money come from? And this is actually one of the most interesting parts. The fund would receive 50% of certain federal energy development revenues, and this includes revenue from oil, revenue from gas, revenue from coal, and even some alternative or even renewable energy development. So, whoa. And this is on federal land. There's also, and this is when you first search up this legislation, this is the first thing that comes up about what it does. There's actually a $1.9 billion annual cap for certain deposits. And this is from fiscal year 2026, the year we're in now, because I'm pretty sure this bill was proposed sometime during the summer in June, around the America 250, because 250 in the name. And one of the sponsors sponsored it June 26th. But yeah, so certain deposits during fiscal year 2026 this year, all the way to fiscal year 2030, so 4 years. And it actually amounts above the applicable cap, the $1.9 billion, and that would go to the general fund of the Treasury. And this is the fund that we're talking about. So there has to be $1.9 billion cap annually, of course. This is 4 years. But the fund also receives donations, which is really great. And also revenue from the bill's foreign visitor fees, which is, I'm actually so excited to talk about that. And that's why this bill is super important. And that's why it matters. Because instead of just saying, Congress, give us more money. It creates so many different sources of money for maintenance of these roads, for maintenance of these old buildings. These are national parks, not only national parks. We're taking care of the wildlife. We're taking care of the people that go into these buildings, right? So there's so many factors that play into it. And that's why we need various sources of money. Because this is such an important issue. And while we could just be like, hey, Congress, give us money. We need money from Congress. It's great to have multiple sources to rely on 100%. Okay, so now we talked about where the money's coming from. Now let's talk about where does the money go? Smart, right? How they're back to back. Yeah. Okay, so that's what I was saying earlier about the percentage of allocation. So the National Park Service, 70% of the money from the fund will go to the National Park Service. 15% of money from the National Fund would go to the Forest Service. 5% would go to the Fish and Wildlife Service. 5% would go to the Bureau of Land Management. And 5% would go to the Bureau of Indian Education. And reminder, this is going to be from like $1 billion worth of money. So these percentages are crazy. And just even a tiny bit, even if it was 1% of that money, it could make a really big difference. So this is absolutely incredible. And actually, it's super funny because how at first I was like, yeah, it's not all about the national parks. That is true. But the national parks are getting the largest share of 70%. But it is really important. So, but it's great, because when you first hear this about the roads, about the infrastructure, the first thing that comes to most people's mind is national parks. But it's great that this bill also addresses Forest Service. It also addresses Fish and Wildlife Service and many others as well. So that's what I really love. And then what can the money actually be used for? We mentioned a little bit about roads and buildings, but let's go more into the specifics, right? The money can be used for things like bridges. It could be used for trails, right? There are so many unsafe trails. Parking areas. Have we seen parking areas in national parks? Not the best, okay? Other infrastructure, various other infrastructure, accessibility improvements. How accessible is everything? What about for disabled people? We need to think about that as well, right? Modernization, which is the great word we said in the beginning. We need to make it look attractive, nice. People need to go there. Maintenance projects. There are many maintenance projects that need to be happening, that need to be going on. And it's really cool about this bill specifically because it actually it kind of prioritizes specific projects where failure could happen. So that's when these things threaten public safety. As we know, in pretty much all of the bills that we've discussed, safety is the key factor. It's like when we have a bill and when Congress is proposing a piece of legislation, safety is the most important. It's the heart of what they do, pretty much. Restricting public park access, not okay, right? Public parks need to be available to everyone. Specifically, causing a park or causing a facility to close at all, that is super important, which is why the bill specifically mentions that. That counts as a failure. Making future repairs much more expensive than they are now also counts as a failure. So that's not good either. That's what it says in this legislation is let's fix the important things first. Let's address these things first. Let's address threats to public safety. Let's address limited public park access. Let's address things that are causing the park to close. If there are really bad roads, really bad buildings, horrible infrastructure, the park is most likely going to close. So let's address that first. And that's what's great about this bill, prioritization. Okay, now we got to the exciting part. I've been talking about it all episode. The next provision, number 6, foreign visitors would have to pay at least $100. Okay. So basically what it's saying here, I know I just read one sentence, but it's saying that for foreign recreational lands that charge an entrance fee or a recreation fee, a non-immigrant foreign visitor would have to pay at least $100 per person. And this is in addition to other fees that they need to pay. And the annual federal recreation lands pass, like if they wanted an annual pass, that would cost them at least $250. Now you might be like, why? Why? The argument for why this needs to happen is that American taxpayers are help maintaining these public lands. So basically, since the taxpayers are helping to pay for these lands to be safe, visitors from other countries also should contribute more toward their use. Now, there are supporters of this part, but there are critics as well. Supporters are saying this is fair. This is completely fair. Why? Because American taxpayers are help maintaining these lands. They're helping to maintain them. But critics are arguing that making America more expensive for international tourists could actually hurt tourism. And it could hurt communities that are depending on visitors. There are so many national parks, so many reserves that are waiting for visitors to come, people do go to national parks, but when you do go to national parks, there are a ton of visitors. Now imagine if they have to pay $100 fee. They may be like, okay, we're not visiting that park. We're not going to visit that wildlife reserve. Maybe not. It is important though, because it's not just like, okay, we're charging them because they're an immigrant and they need to pay. It's like, hey, this money is going to go toward the safety of the park. So when you put it that way, it's really great. But when you talk about it like, hey, they're foreign visitors, so they need to pay more money, that doesn't sound super great. But just knowing the impact of what this money is going to have on these places that these visitors love to go to, thinking about it that way is really cool. And we may address this again in the counter arguments. We will see. But yeah, that's one of the biggest provisions of this legislation as well. And then we are going to we're going to address the 7th one as well. More transparency. We can go to this really quickly, right? The bill is basically requiring the government to create a dashboard that's publicly available. So it needs to show information about all these projects, because one thing people hate is when a bill is passed, but they don't get any insight into it. They don't know what's happening, right? So with this bill and this dashboard, people would be able to see things. They would be able to see where the project is, where are they targeting first, what it's going to cost, how much of the fund are they using for this project? Is it over the budget? Is it behind schedule? All of those important things, and that just helps them understand, okay, this is where the project is going. Many other factors as well, right? The environmental review. Is it good for the environment? Are they using horrible products? Are they, breaking buildings? Are they harming wildlife? What is it doing to the environment? How much money has already been spent, and how much more money are they planning to spend? Were any donations received? Is the project actually helpful in reducing maintenance blocking? So these are really important questions that people honestly deserve to know the answers to, because this is their taxpayer money. So this is super important for sure. Okay, and yeah, it's just all about accountability, right? Making sure that this fund is being used for the right things, and the government would just show, here's the project, here's the cost, here's the timeline, here's what we've accomplished. And that just helps people know, okay, this bill was worth it. Okay, it's happening the way I want it to happen. Or maybe not, which would not be good. Alrighty, okay. And Okay, let's see. I'm looking because it's already been 15 minutes, so let's figure it out. But I'm gonna say we're gonna go through two more provisions. And yes, when I say there's a lot of provisions for this bill, there are a lot of provisions. Like, this bill is huge. It's amazing. But okay, this one's great. This is something I love. Faster construction. This bill speeds up the maintenance projects. It basically requires agencies to award a construction contract within 180 days after their final design approval. So this is what we would call a priority deferred maintenance project. So they would have a specific priority, and it creates certain contracting flexibilities, but it also limits costs. So it's like basically saying, don't spend years planning how you're going to fix something that's already falling apart. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, if it's already falling apart, we need to take action now. We can't spend years planning for it. So that's why they need to have a construction contract. And that's why there needs to be a design approval. But 180 days after design approval, the project needs to begin. It needs to just start, things need to start happening, Because a lot of the time they'll be like, okay, we're going to have this project, but we're going to take I get the planning process is hard, right? Making sure the design is perfect, it's safe, it's environment friendly, it's hard. But taking years to plan for something that's already breaking apart is kind of sad, because it's like, okay, it's already breaking apart. So why are we taking years to plan for it? You know what I mean? So it's pretty tough. But yeah, so this 180-day contract would be amazing, literally amazing. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to be talking about for the provision is accessibility. And, I believe I briefly mentioned accessibility, but accessibility is so important, especially for these public areas. And under this legislation, it actually requires the agencies to consider accessibility for both visitors with disabilities and for employees with disabilities. That's so sweet. I thought that was so sweet. Yeah. And that just could mean improving infrastructure so more people can use these trails. More people can use these facilities, like all of these recreational areas, visitor spaces, because they're not that accessible as of right now. And this is a really important social impact component, but it could also easily get overlooked. So that's why it's so great that this legislation is prioritizing it. Okay, so we're going to briefly talk about some of the counter arguments, and then we will close out for today. So as we know, the first concern, what do you guys think the first concern is going to be? It's expensive, okay? And I agree, but let's look at the impact. Okay, let me talk about that counter argument a little bit more. This bill could direct large amounts of federal revenue toward this public land maintenance, but critics could argue, this, is this the best use of federal money? There are various other priorities. There is healthcare, there's education, there's national defense, there's reducing the national debt. I mean, have you seen the national debt clock? Crazy. Actually crazy. The debt clock is, I actually didn't know about the debt clock, the debt clock. What did I say? The debt clock until a few days ago, maybe almost a week ago now. But when I found out about it, I was like, wow, like it's crazy. Like, you can just search up debt clock, and the numbers are just, it's fascinating. It's super duper cool. But yeah, so no, this money is going towards a good cause. We need our infrastructure to be way more safer. We don't want national parks to close down. We don't want these reserves to close down. We want them to stay in business. So this is awesome. The way this money is being used is great. And of course, there's always going to be other things that we can put our money towards. But right now, this is a great way to be spending our money. So yeah, that's literally what I could say. In all of these bills, it's always like, okay, is this the best use of money? In this case, yes. We need these things to be more safe. So 100%. Okay, the second concern, and I love how I kept bringing it up, the foreign visitor fee and the fact that it could hurt tourism. So this is what, and I'm going to read exactly what a foreign tourist might think. They might think, okay, hello, I'm already paying for a hotel. I'm already paying for transportation. I'm already paying for food. And I'm already paying for so many other entrance fees. Now I have to pay another $100? That's literally what's going to be going through their mind. And critics argue that this could make American parks more expensive for international tourists, and this could discourage international visitors, meaning that people are going to just stop visiting these national parks. There's going to be limited people visiting, which is sad. And I think, it makes sense why they would be charged this extra amount, but it's also, it makes sense from the foreigner's perspective too, because they're like, why do I need to be charged an extra amount? But it's really great that this money is going towards making their park safer. And maybe if they do go to this park when it's not safe, they realize, okay, I get why I'm putting this $100 in. If it's going to make this park better, safer for my mom who's not able to walk, or for my kid who needs to walk in this building and it does not look safe. The infrastructure looks very, very old and not safe at all. Then they might think twice, they might think otherwise. So that it's all really based on a variety of factors. But then again, I understand why it's super duper controversial. Okay, so let's close out today's episode with just a final thought. And that thought is going to be, how is this affecting the country as a whole? So this bill, it's bigger than fixing Yellowstone. It's bigger than fixing Yosemite. Well, those are great parks, but it affects the entire country because there are federal public lands that exist throughout the United States. Now, economically, better parks equals more visitors, equals more spending, equals more economic activity in surrounding communities. Environmentally, maintaining infrastructure helps people access these public lands without allowing the facilities, without allowing the infrastructure to just fully deteriorate. I mean, that would be awful. And then socially, which is what we're going to close out with, millions of Americans use public land for recreation, which is super cool, for hiking. I've been hiking before, but I get so exhausted, so tired. But yeah, for hiking, right? For camping. I mean, we love going camping. Fishing, hunting, education, right? There are so many education camps that happen in these areas. Tourism, right? Which we talked about. So environmentally, economically, socially, this bill is incredible. Yeah, it's great. Of course, there are concerns, right? Money, foreigners needing to pay, complications of a piece of legislation, but when you think about the impact that it is having, it's going to make a huge change in national parks and wildlife reserves. I mean, it's going to make the infrastructure so much safer, so much better. So yeah, a lot to think about for today's episode. But that is going to be everything for today. And, if you like this episode, I really hope that you consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And thank you so much for listening. And we will catch you next week. Bye.